You're listening to a Frequency Podcast Network production.
For the past 13 years, Toronto has been run by conservatives. First, by a loud and proud one, infamous Mayor Rob Ford. Then, by a quieter and more boring one in John Tory, who tacked more towards the center, but in the end, left office in scandal, just like his predecessor, creating a by-election, which takes place Monday. And if the polls are to be believed, Toronto's next mayor will be absolutely nothing like the men who came before her.
If you're mad, frustrated, angry, I get it. I'm angry too.
Olivia Chow has as many progressive left-wing bona fides as any career politician and activist. She was an NDP MP, married, of course, to former NDP leader Jack Layton, and has a long history of sitting as a leftist city councillor and fighting for progressive causes. She is running on a platform of spending to make the city better, which will require, yes, raising taxes. And she won't say exactly how much she'd raise them by, which, as you might imagine, does not go over well with her opponents and their supporters. But somehow, she is poised to win in a landslide, again, if you believe the polls. So what's changed in Toronto and with Olivia Chow since she ran for this job in 2014 and finished a dismal third? Is this race all but over? Or could this weekend or election day see a surge for one of the many candidates chasing her? What happens if it is over and Canada's largest city takes a hard left turn? I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. This is The Big Story. Ben Spur is a reporter with the Toronto Star's City Hall Bureau who has been covering this mayoral election. Hello, Ben.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. When we first covered, the first and only episode we did about this race was before the filing deadline, when we weren't sure how many candidates would actually run for mayor. And the feeling then was that the race was wide open. How has that turned out?
It's looking a little less wide open now. For the past several weeks, all the polls have been telling a similar story that Olivia Chow, the former NDP MP, has a pretty healthy lead, and it hasn't really wavered much. There's been some movement in who's second, third, and fourth place, but she's been out in front since she basically entered the race and hasn't dipped. And so with a couple of days to go, she is out ahead, and it looks like it's her election to lose.
Was that popularity expected when she joined the race? I recall a lot of people who probably now support her because they're very progressive, not wanting her to get into this race.
Yeah, I think she ran in 2014 and had what is widely considered a pretty disastrous campaign. She started out as the front runner and then faded really badly over the course of the campaign and came in a disappointing third to Doug Ford and the winner, John Tory. So I think when she entered, there were fears among Toronto's progressive leaning voters that she might have a similar trajectory. And I think there was also just some consternation that there wasn't another candidate who could take up that progressive standard, right? It's been, 9 years since she last ran. A lot has happened at City Hall since then. Mm-hmm. And there have been some pretty well-known and broadly popular left-leaning councillors at City Hall, the likes of Joe Cressy and Mike Layton, who I think many people did expect to get into the race, who were kind of mayoral candidates in waiting over the last couple of years. But they both opted to not enter the race. And so it kind of left a dearth of young, political talent, so to speak. So I think there was some maybe disappointment that the kind of old guard of Olivia Chow was coming into the race to take up that progressive banner. And for people who wanted a left-wing mayor elected, there was some fears that, her campaign would turn out like her 2014 one did.
Well, it obviously hasn't, and the city votes on Monday. You mentioned it's her race to lose, and, there's 2, 3, 4 sort of well behind. Maybe just give us the top 4 if you can and the rough poll numbers. I know that there are a million polls out there and they kind of each seem to fluctuate a little bit.
Yeah. So behind there's been some conflicting poll results, but the aggregate of the polls shows that at the moment, at least, Mark Saunders, the former police chief of Toronto, is around second place with about 15% of the support of decided voters, compared to Chow, who's at above 30%. Below Saunders is Anna Bailau, a former city councillor and one of John Tory's deputy mayors. Below her is Josh Matlow, who is a current city councillor, who is also a progressive, running a progressive campaign, but is kind of an independent progressive, as opposed to Olivia Chow, who has the advantage of being able to plug into this kind of NDP apparatus in Toronto to help her campaign.
Do we know what's different about her campaign this time? As you say, the 2014 campaign, I mean, I remember that race. It was pretty disastrous. She faded very quickly. What's different? What's her message being to voters this time?
Well, what's different this time, she was asked about right from the bat, right when she got in the race, about, what she would do differently. She said that she, in 2014, was self-conscious about herself, particularly her English skills. English isn't her first language. And so she said that she ran that campaign by relying on notes and written speeches and didn't really speak off the cuff. And so she said that this time around, she was going to be more authentic, I guess, and just kind of talk directly to voters. And that's one thing she's done. But I think other ways you can see that perhaps she's learned from 2014 is that one thing is she entered the race late. She entered it in mid-April after most of the other leading candidates were already in. So if you're worried about your campaign fading over time, as her one in 2014 did, getting into the race late maybe inoculates you a bit from that. Maybe it gives you less time to get attacked by opponents and less time for your support to kind of dwindle. And she also, in 2014, she took a lot of flack from the left in Toronto for out of the gate promising to not raise taxes above the rate of inflation, which is a kind of a conservative or centrist tactic that Mayor John Tory and, of course, before him, Rob Ford ran on successfully. But that just seemed to kind of hamstring her campaign, or sort of kind of undermined her progressive credentials, I guess, because she couldn't really talk a lot about investing heavily in city services when she was also saying that, tax revenue is basically not going to increase. So I think this time around, she has not said she won't raise tax rates above the rate of inflation. She's not actually specified what her tax increase would be, and she's taken a lot of heat from her opponents on that, but that has given her some wiggle room to kind of paint herself not just as another middle of the road candidate, but as someone who might raise city revenue to improve services, which a lot of people are unsatisfied with in Toronto right now.
I was going to ask this later, but since you just touched on it, I'll ask it now. One of the biggest criticisms I've seen of Olivia Chow is that she hasn't provided much in the way of specifics at all. What do we know about what her vision for Toronto is? What actual policies she would plan to enact were she to win this thing?
She wants the city to get more directly involved in housing construction. The approach of the previous administrations has largely been to kind of make it easier for the private sector to build housing. She says she wants the city to get directly involved again in building affordable housing for people. She says she would raise property taxes by a modest amount, but also would increase the tax on vacant properties, would introduce a new higher tax rate on the transfer of mansions, basically a mansion tax, she said, like the sales of homes over $2 million, she would increase the tax on that. She also wants to reverse TTC service cuts, which have come into effect recently and upset a lot of transit users. So those are some of the broad strokes of her policy, but you're certainly correct that some of her opponents, notably Josh Matlow and Mitzi Hunter, the former Scarborough MPP for the Liberal Party, have released really detailed platforms, really crunched the numbers on their plans. Mitzi Hunter has been fond of waving her booklet of her platform around at debates, and Olivia Chow has not provided that level of specificity, to be sure.
What about on the right? One of the things that has surprised me about this race is that support on that side has not really consolidated around any one person. Why is that? What are the options there, and how have their campaigns gone?
kind of headed into the race, the strongest conservative candidate appeared to be Mark Saunders, who is the former police chief. He was here from 2015 to 2020, and he ran for the Ontario PC party last year. He's a conservative with ties to Doug Ford. A lot of Saunders' campaign team has links to Ford and his party. And so he seemed like the person who was going to provide the counterbalance, I guess, to Olivia Chow and be the strong conservative candidate. His campaign hasn't really taken off. And in recent weeks, it's really been, I think, undermined by the rise in the polls of a candidate who I don't think many people thought was going to have much of an impact at all on this race, was Anthony Furey, a former Toronto Sun columnist who is on leave from his job as an executive at a right-wing media site. And he's come in and I think released a lot of kind of eye-catching proposals and controversial ones as well. But he sort of seems to be the kind of unadulterated conservative in a way that Saunders is not. Saunders, I think, is, he says that he's not an insider, but he's been around politics for a little while at this point and kind of talks like a politician. Right. Anthony Furey is, I think, a bit more direct in his approach and kind of blunt to talking about things like clearing homeless encampments from parks and kind of raising the fears, I think it's fair to say, over, safe injection sites and harm reduction drug policies and that kind of thing. And I think that his message is resonating in a way that Saunders hasn't. I think he just sort of reads as a more authentic conservative to a lot of voters. And so he's kind of shot up the polls, not to a huge degree. He's maybe around 10%. But I think he's eating into Saunders' support and making it really difficult for the former police chief to catch up with Olivia Chow.
What about in the middle of the political spectrum? I mean, this is the territory John Tory was frankly famous for, right? And certainly based on, I guess, outside impressions of Toronto as a kind of milquetoast political city, seems like a lane that somebody should be occupying well.
Yeah, and so the kind of the person to occupy that lane, and to some extent, I think Tory's heir apparent has been Anna Bailau, who was one of Tory's deputy mayors and is a political liberal and very much kind of wants to pitch herself as a middle of the road kind of moderate person who can get along with different levels of government and with business and labor and get things done very much in the mold of John Tory. You also have Mitzi Hunter, who until a couple of weeks ago was a Liberal MPP. And so you would maybe paint her as a kind of centrist, but she's actually ran a pretty progressive campaign that's quite similar to Chow's and Matlow's in some ways. And then there's also Brad Bradford, who on council has been more of a centrist. His campaign is a bit more right-wing than his council record. So there's sort of three candidates in there that are all kind of fighting out for the middle, and none of them have really been able to rise above the rest of the pack.
Before we move on to election night and the days after, if indeed Chow holds on to her lead, is there any sense that something could still shift? Is this a situation where either Furey or Saunders, who, collectively might have close to the numbers that Chow does, or, candidates in the center, could unite and tell their supporters to vote strategically and make a dent in Olivia? Is everybody just still out for themselves?
Yeah, I think if we were going to see that the kind of rallying around a single candidate to block Chow, it would have happened a while ago. At this point, with about 4 days till election day, that's leaving it very late, and it likely wouldn't have an impact. I think there's just not enough time to get a message out to voters to shift their support to somewhere else. And I think that's, at the best of times, it's a questionable strategy. I'm not sure how effective that is. But I actually reported on this last weekend and did kind of try to get behind the scenes a bit as to conversations about that. There have been actually conversations between the campaigns about potentially dropping out to try to block Chow. But because all the kind of trailing candidates are all sort of tangled up with, somewhere between, 8, 14% of support. It's really hard for any of them to make the strong case that they're the one who can go and beat Chow.
Yeah.
Fury has shown no interest at all, for instance, in dropping out and throwing his support behind Saunders. Fury says that he's the one who has momentum. He's been rising in the polls, whereas Saunders is flat. So he says that if anyone should drop out, basically it should be Saunders dropping out to support him. So there's just no kind of clear anyone but Chow candidate. So even though those conversations, I think, did kind of happen informally and people did test the waters, just it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And certainly, I think, not at this late date.
What about a surprise on election night itself? And I don't mean somebody magically running away with this thing, but I know from covering the last election that turnout was at an all-time low. Like it was abysmal. If that happens again, is there a chance something shifts? And what do we know so far about what turnout might likely be?
This is, I feel this is kind of a nerdy interest of mine, I guess, but like I'm really interested about what the turnout will be in this election, because I think there are a lot of different kind of conflicting factors that could push it either higher than last time's abysmal turnout, as you say, or actually depress it lower. Generally, by-elections are notoriously low turnout, right? But the reason for that is usually that at the provincial and federal levels, a by-election has no chance of affecting the government, right? It's just one seat changing out of hundreds or dozens at least. But at this point, whoever wins this by-election will actually control city government or be the head of it. So it's not quite clear whether that by-election effect will take place. But there's also just issues like, there's no council races going on with the mayor's race this time. Usually in a municipal election, you're also running simultaneous elections for local wards. So in one sense, that could kind of focus people's attention on the mayor's race and maybe make them tune in a bit more because there's less names out there and kind of less conflicting campaigns and that kind of thing. So you can see that boosting turnout. But at the same time, in a normal municipal election, you have all those council candidates going door to door, trying to pull the vote on election day and get them to the polls where they also vote for mayor. So that's not happening this time.
Right.
But to your point about a low turnout, perhaps like affecting the race, I don't know that it would kind of throw up a surprise in terms of who wins, but I think the turnout will have an important effect potentially on the winner's ability to actually govern, right? If Olivia Chow, for instance, at the moment is polling at about 30%, that's lower than the last couple of elections the mayor has won with. And if turnout's very low as well, then she would, or whoever wins could be elected with a pretty small percentage of eligible voters in Toronto. And that would make it difficult, presumably, for the mayor to go to other levels of government, for instance, and push their agenda. The city has a huge funding issue right now. It needs help from the provincial and federal governments. And if the mayor, doesn't have the backing of a wide swath of Toronto voters, it kind of makes their leverage with other levels of government weaker, presumably.
I know for people who casually follow Ontario politics, one of the biggest issues of the past couple of years has been the relationship between the city of Toronto and the province of Ontario, led by Premier Doug Ford. Ford came out pretty hard against Olivia Chow just a day or so ago. What did he say about her? And what, if anything, has she said about potentially working with him if she wins? Do they have any history?
Yeah, so Ford came out just yesterday and said that Chow being elected would be an absolute disaster for the city, saying that she would hike taxes, make life more unaffordable for residents, drive out businesses, basically, cause the collapse of the local economy.
Scorched earth.
Yeah, pretty much. One of the more notable moments of this campaign, actually, you have seen all the candidates at various points, most of them at least, take shots at the premier. But at an editorial board meeting with the star, Olivia Chow was asked about this. And I found her response really interesting, that she said, she was asked how she would work with the premier. And she said that, Doug Ford loves Toronto too. He wants the city to succeed. He doesn't always express it in a way that I agree with, but he wants Toronto to be a good and successful place to live. And I thought that was really kind of conciliatory in a way that some of the other candidates have not been about Doug Ford. And of course, Doug Ford has not, as of yesterday at least, been towards her. And what is notable is that as divided as Ford and Chow might be politically, They do have a bit of a personal history. Rob Ford, the premier's brother, sat next to Jack Layton, Olivia Chow's late husband, on council. And they were kind of an odd couple in a way. They were friendly to each other. Layton was really kind of helped out Rob Ford when he was new on council, just kind of learned the ropes a little bit. And Rob Ford had a lot of positive things to say about Jack Layton. And of course, when Jack Layton died, Rob Ford expressed his condolences to Olivia Chow. And when Rob Ford also died of cancer a couple of years ago, our understanding is Olivia Chow, reached out to Doug Ford and his family and was, to express her condolences. So there are kind of family ties there, and a bit of a personal relationship that might help them work together despite how, far apart they are on the political spectrum.
In terms of working together, or I guess just in terms of the dynamic, no matter who is elected, really, the province, I believe, and you might need to sort of explain this to me, recently granted strong mayor powers to whoever is the Toronto mayor. What does that mean for whomever takes office after this election? And even in terms of their working relationship with the province, I know one of the big items in this campaign has been the province's desire to change the Greenbelt or move the Science Centre or do those kind of things. Where do those powers come in that situation? Or is that just strictly a council level only power?
Yeah, so the strong mayor powers, which were introduced last year, give whoever's mayor of Toronto some pretty extraordinary abilities. The most controversial one is that the mayor can pass certain measures through council with the support of just 1/3 of council members, which a lot of critics say is undemocratic. He or she can also introduce the budget on their own, can pass certain budget measures. The mayor can veto council, and then council has the ability to overturn that veto with 2/3 support. So the mayor does have some authorities, whoever is elected on Monday. The caveat, though, is the province, when they introduced those powers, kind of put in this safety valve to some extent that a lot of people thought was odd and does not exist in other strong mayor systems in the United States, for instance, which is that the mayor can only use those authorities like passing a measure with 1/3 support of council to advance an issue that is a provincial priority. So you couldn't see a mayor coming in and having an agenda completely opposed to the conservative provincial agenda and kind of ramming a bunch of things through council with less than 1/3 support. So the mayor is, a strong mayor in relation to council, but is on a short leash in relation to the provincial government. And when it comes to other issues like moving Ontario Place or the Greenbelt and that kind of thing, whoever's mayor has basically no ability to interfere in some of those issues.
Hasn't stopped them from yelling about it, though.
Yeah, exactly. And you've seen the candidates this election use, voter antipathy towards those plans to kind of take a run at Doug Ford and his government and hope of boosting their support. But whoever gets into office has limited abilities to actually change the province's plans on those kind of things. As the phrase is, bandied around City Hall, that the city is a creature of the province. It doesn't have the ability to overrule it on most important issues.
Just to make sure I'm explaining the strong mayor powers right, this would mean that if, say, Mayor Chow was going to attempt to, build a ton of public housing, she could not do it with 1/3 of council unless Premier Ford approved, but she could still pass it the traditional way with a majority of council.
Yes, that's right. And just to get into the weeds, I guess, where I think things will get really interesting is that the province has officially designated building more housing as a priority that these rules apply to. But, the province hasn't shown much support for the government actually getting directly involved in building a new affordable housing, for instance. So if Olivia Chow was elected mayor and tried to advance that and tried to apply the strong mayor powers to that, then that would be, I think, interesting to see how the province would react. I think important to note, actually, that Olivia Chow, along with other candidates like Josh Matlow, Mitzi Hunter, have said that they won't use the strong mayor powers, even though they have them available to them. They believe that they're undemocratic and say that they would work with council to advance their agenda and not use these new authorities to ram their agenda through.
Last question, kind of a two-parter. First, what will you be watching for between now and when the winner is decided on Monday night to get a sense of if this thing is really over? And second, if it is really over and Chow holds her lead, what will you be watching for first to see what she does or prioritizes?
Yeah, I think what we're watching for between now and Election Day is whether or not there's anything that could, dramatically shift voters' opinions at this point. There was a potential twist yesterday when former Mayor John Tory came out and endorsed Anna Bailão. Her team is hoping that pushes her over the top and it will sort of catch up with Chow. Whether that is likely remains, we'll have to wait and see. And I think it's important to note, of course, that even though Olivia Chow is out in front in the polls, it's not over until the voting is done and anything could happen. So, we don't want to say that it's a complete lock for her. But I think that once the election does take place, what I think I'll be watching for is, this is a city government that has been, center right or further right for the past 12, 13 years. So if there is a progressive mayor who's elected, I think it'll be really interesting to see how they shake up City Hall in terms of, there'll be a real shift in the power balance. I think, a lot of the same councillors who supported Rob Ford's mayoralty went on to kind of pivot to be supporters of John Tory's mayoralty, and the kind of councillors left was relegated to the sidelines. I think you could see a big shift in that dynamic if a more progressive mayor is elected. And then I think we're just waiting to see what the new mayor does to address the really urgent problems facing the city, right? The city government has a $1.5 billion dollar operating deficit that it needs to figure out how to fix immediately to avoid serious cuts to transit and other city services. And housing, of course, is a hugely urgent issue where we have people, moving out of Toronto because it's just too expensive to live here. And whoever is mayor, pretty much on day one has to get started on addressing those really pressing issues.
Ben, thanks so much for this, and I guess we'll see you on Monday.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Ben Spur, reporting from City Hall for the Toronto Star. That was The Big Story. If you'd like more, head to thebigstorypodcast.ca. You can find us, as always, on Twitter at TheBigStoryFPN. I'm working on the Blue Sky invite, so if you got one, send it our way, and we'll meet you there too. You can always email us. Don't need an invite for that. The address is hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. And you can call us and leave a voicemail, 416-935-5935. Joe Fish is the lead producer of The Big Story. Robin Simon also produces on the show this week. Ali Graham produced a couple of episodes. Ryan Clark handled our sound design. Suman Dara is our research assistant. And I'm Jordan Heath Rawlings. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. We have something really special for you on Sunday when we turn 5. So we'll talk then.